Hi everybody, my name is Zahira, and thank you Hector for introducing me, and I want to just say thank you to all of the people who put on the Kansas City Paranormal Conference for putting all of this together, because it takes a huge amount of work to put together an event like this. And I also want to say thank you for the fact that I was invited to come and speak. It's a huge honor to me to be a part of this event, so thank you very much. So, hello everybody. Before we get into our talk about false light entities, I just want to let you all know that we're passing around a pad of paper where you can write down your email address if you'd like to, so that I can send you the audio recording of this talk. And also, in addition to the audio recording, I'm going to send you some other freebies, a couple of free video classes, past Facebook Lives, about really fascinating spiritual topics, and also a free quiz to find out if you are vulnerable to psychic attack and unwanted types of paranormal activity. Because you may not realize that there are some areas where you may be vulnerable, and it's a good idea to take proactive action to make sure that you take care of those vulnerabilities in the first place, so you don't have to call one of the Ghostbusters to help you. All right, so once again, hello everybody. My name is Zahira. I am a professional psychic, an energy healer, a spiritual teacher, and a psychic protection expert. A psychic protection expert is someone who understands the world of the paranormal and the spiritual, what it is that's really out there, and how to protect yourself. So because of that expertise that I have, I tend to be a bridge between the spiritual people out there and the paranormal people out there, because it tends to be kind of two different interests. We have the people who are into the ghost hunting and the paranormal, and then the spirituals, the people who are into spiritual stuff, the mediums, the psychics, and all of that. I tend to be a bridge. So just explaining that so you have some context as to the person who is teaching you today. All right, so I do a lot of speaking and teaching, and this is the only talk in years and years and years that I have made note cards. So that means that you guys are extra special. I have a lot that I want to cover, and I want to make sure that I don't miss anything. So you'll have to forgive me if I peek down at my notes every once in a while. So today's topic is all about false light entities. In other words, spiritual beings who are pretending to be something that they are not. In other words, imposter entities. There's actually a long history of spiritual beings pretending to be something that they're not. I happened to be raised as Catholic, and I remember reading stories of mystic saints who would have appearances. Beings would appear to them pretending to be angels, and then they would turn out to be demons and things like that. So there's actually lots and lots of stories about this type of phenomenon. This is actually not something that is just now beginning to happen. It's been happening for a long time. So before I get into teaching exactly what this phenomenon is, I think it's relevant, I think it's very important to give you some history as to how I came to so fully understand what false light entities are. Keeping in mind that I do have the unique skill set of being psychic, of being able to see energies, spirits, being able to hear messages and feel intuitive information as well. So it is important, I think, to share what I know in kind of a story context so that you understand how this builds. So as a child, I was always very open spiritually. I was able to see energies. Sometimes I was able to see auras around certain people's heads. Not everybody, but certain people. I also often had premonition types of dreams. And when I got into my adolescence, which is it's very much a time of upheaval for most kids, that's actually often a time when psychic abilities really open up, and it really did for me. And I started having very profound spiritual visions, even when I was 14, 15, 16 years old. When I got into my 20s, I started to engage in more formal types of education in psychic training, intuitive development, and I also began studying Reiki, energy healing, and all of those skill sets. Before my mid-20s, however, all of the psychic experiences were just very haphazard. I couldn't get psychic information on just at will. It would just happen randomly. But once I started my formal studies, then I was able to access information basically at will, and it started happening more and more frequently, like every day, to the point where by the time I was in my 30s, I was having experiences just really interwoven throughout every day, all day. When I was in my 30s, my work, by the way, I think it was in my early 30s that I gave up my regular standard day job and I started doing this spiritual work full time. And most of my focus was on women's empowerment types of spiritual events, retreats, Reiki sessions, and that sort of thing. But then throughout my 30s, that kind of work eventually transformed so that I began working with all genders. So those of you who've known me for a long time may remember that I was the lady who put on all the women's circles and taught belly dancing and all of that stuff within a spiritual context. But that evolved so that I began working with everybody. And by my 40s, I'm now in my late 40s. By my 40s, I really started to take on more of a role of leadership in the spiritual community, teaching, and as well as doing all of the one-on-one sessions and all of those things that I've been doing before. Now, my approach with spirituality has always been very grounded. I'm not one of those people who's out in la la land channeling all sorts of stuff but not really connected here in the here and now on this planet. For me, I'm very, very grounded. And even in my 40s, I always had an understanding that it's very important for me to teach my students about psychic protection, about what's out there. Because in the spiritual community slash new age community slash metaphysical community, whatever you want to call it, there's a very common popular belief that anything that's spiritual is all good. It's all good. There's nothing that you need to protect yourself from. There's nothing to worry about. If it's spiritual, it's from God, therefore it's all good. Even though I always had a very grounded approach and I was teaching psychic protection to my students as a part of the rotation of all the different things that I taught them, I still somewhat took on some of that belief that most of what's out there is pretty good spiritually. Until about a little over 3 years ago, I had a really profound, mind-blowing, life-altering experience that, it really completely changed my work and my life, and that's why I'm here speaking to all of you. So before I get into telling you that whole story, I share all of this story that I'm gonna go into right now in my book, Darkness Disguised as Light: The Hidden Truth About Psychic Protection and the Illusion Matrix. That's a big, long name, but if you want to just remember, darkness disguised as light, and I have them for sale today, but you can also get them on Amazon.com. So, before this big major event that I just referred to about 3.5 years ago, before that, I had a couple of years where I started to notice really strange things going on in my spiritual community. When I would go to meditation circles, when I would go to drum circles, when I would go to like sound healing events where they had crystal bowls and Tibetan bowls and things like that, group energy healing sessions and things like that, I started to notice very odd things happening, but no one else seemed to be noticing. Everybody else acted like everything was wonderful and fine, and meanwhile, I'm silently freaking out. Let me give you an example. During this time period, when my abilities were opening up more and more, I went to a spiritual drum circle. It was at a yoga studio, and it seemed to be a very lovely event. Everybody was sitting in a very large circle. There were people with Native American drums, Middle Eastern drums, shakers, rattles, and the facilitator was a beautiful person. The owner of the studio was a beautiful person. All very good vibes, seemingly. But we start this drum circle, and they start calling in all of the energies, and they're drumming, and people get up and they're dancing. And then a person about, I think she was 3 people to my right, all of a sudden she starts vibrating and shaking and convulsing. And with my psychic vision, I look over at her and I see that clearly, obviously, she's being possessed by a demon. And even someone without clairvoyant abilities would be able to see that this person is shaking, making weird noises, something is happening. And I look around, and the person putting on the event isn't doing anything. The group, the yoga studio owner is totally fine with this thing that's happening. And I'm like, well, it's not my event. I feel like I can't really do anything. And why isn't anyone else seeing this? So I was going through this period where I was having some self-doubt and questioning myself, even though I knew what I was seeing was real, but why wasn't anyone else seeing it? There was another event that I went to that was a sound healing concert with some young adults who were creating sacred music, both with Tibetan bowls and other sacred instruments and electronics. And everybody was really crowded into this room. Everybody was sitting on the floor on their yoga mats, and they were all just enthralled with this experience that they were having. And meanwhile, I'm getting really upset, and I'm wanting to bolt out the door because the energy felt horrible to me, and I could see with my clairvoyant vision, I could see there was a fissure opening up, this fissure of light opening up in the center of the room, and it opened, and all these entities started coming through. And I'm like, I don't want to be in this environment anymore, and so I left. And later, the person who ran the studio messaged me and said, "Are you okay? Everyone had such a wonderful time at this event, and we were wondering why you left." And I said, "Well, it just really wasn't for me." I found out later, after the fact, that there were some people who had been family members of the studio owners. They had been on the premise a couple of nights before. They'd been experimenting with some illegal substances and doing some, they were just messing around with some spiritual exploration with using hallucinatory drugs. And I'm not saying this from a place of judgment. What anyone decides to do is up to them. But what they ended up doing was calling in some unsavory stuff, and that started to show up even more once all of these sound vibrations started to permeate the space. So that was a period of time where I had multiple experiences where I was noticing weird stuff going on in what was my community, the New Age / spiritual community. Again, remember that there's a very common belief that if it's spiritual, it's all good. There's nothing to protect yourself from. And what I was finding was that based on what I was seeing, that's absolutely not true. So let's talk about what I went through about 3.5 years ago. And this is the story that I talk about in my book, Darkness Disguised as Light. This is how I came to really, really understand what false light entities are, beings that pretend to be something that they are not. So a little over 3 years ago, I went to a healer, an energy healer, for advice, someone who I saw as a colleague. I went to her for advice regarding what I would call a mild psychic attack situation that I was noticing in my life. A psychic attack is where a person or an entity is sending some kind of negative energy your way. And there's a whole spectrum of severity. A psychic attack can be very mild, where it's barely noticeable. And maybe you might be having a few bad dreams, or there's just some things that feel a little bit off in your life, maybe just a little bit of bad luck. And the other end of the spectrum is like full out spiritual warfare. There's stuff flying around your house and there's demons attacking you. So there's a whole spectrum. So I was experiencing a fairly mild situation that I became aware of. And so I thought, well, let me just see what this colleague has to say, because this person specializes, they said that they specialize in psychic protection and psychic attack. So I went to just, tap into this person's knowledge and find out if they had any advice. So long story short, this person ended up not being who they said they were. Now, I'm making a conscious choice here to skip a lot of the details of the story, because it's actually really complex. The situation that happened had multiple layers to it. There were about 4 or 5 layers of psychic attack, unwanted paranormal activity that started just like blasting into my life as a direct result right after going to this one person for help. But naturally, I didn't want to think that it was coming from this person. There are times when you're in the middle of a situation and you're kind of blind to what's happening because you're just too close to all of it. So it took me several weeks to realize what was happening. But let me just give you a couple of the high points of some of the things that were going on before I was able to resolve the situation. Some of the indicators of this major psychic attack were flashing lights in my house, not for electrical reasons, okay? It wasn't like a normal, mundane, like there's an issue with the electrical system. There were lights flashing, whichever room that I was in. If I started talking about this issue, this psychic attack that I was going through, suddenly the lights would start flashing on and off. I also had experiences with missing time. Now, missing time is something that's talked about a lot with alien abductions, but we don't talk about it very much with spiritual activities. Missing time is where you maybe look at the clock and it's like 9 a.m. and then it feels like a minute later you look at the clock again and it's 4 p.m. and you're wondering what the heck just happened. So I was having instances of missing time. And by the way, when I would come out of that missing time, like when I'd be on the other side, the weather would be completely different. Like all of a sudden, like 1 minute it would be sunny and the sun is shining and it's hot. I was in my house. Next minute, it's totally overcast and it's storming and it's dark and it's 4 p.m. So that was happening. I was having very, very strange dreams. There were animals that were acting very weird. There were birds in my yard that would chase after me and squawk and squawk and squawk and act very strangely. And I have 2 cats. I have 2 pets. And they would not come into the house. They would hide in the garage because the entity was in the house. There were also bends in reality. And one bend in reality was also related to animals. It was about 3 a.m. and I was afraid to go to sleep. And I was sitting on my bed trying to rack my brain as to how to clear out this this paranormal activity. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, as I was praying and praying and praying for help, all of a sudden this really weird bird, heard this really weird bird sound outside my window that sounded like no bird I have ever heard. In fact, it sounded like a fake bird, like it was created electronically. And I've never heard a bird like that since. It was very odd. So long story short, the person that I went to for assistance was actually not beneficial. What I came to understand was that they are working with what I've coined the term false light entity. So this person, and of course I never identify anybody here. You notice I've been very vague. I say this person because I've come to find out this phenomenon is extremely common. So this is not about calling anybody out. This is about understanding how this thing happens so that you can be discerning and make whatever decisions are best for you. About who you work with and what people you work with, what healers you work with, and what kind of entities and beings you'll work with. But suffice it to say that this person was working with an energy that they thought was okay, I think, but that was pretending to be an angel, but was not. There was one point in the situation where actually there were two points during the psychic attack where I was very violently attacked. And I'm just looking through the audience to make sure there are no little kids here. So at one point, the entity sexually assaulted me. And I do want to say that yes, this actually does happen. There are people who've never had extreme paranormal activities, especially people who have the New Age belief that all spiritual things are positive. They will often say things to me like, entities can't do that to you. They don't do that kind of thing. Entities can't hurt you. Well, they actually can do that sort of thing. I had it happen to me, and then when I started working with clients with those kinds of issues, I've worked with clients who've had that as well. I also had an experience where this entity actually reached in to my body and what it felt like was that it was trying to tear my soul out of my body. It's this, I can't even describe how it felt. It was this big jolt of something that was inside my body. So it reached into my shoulders and jolted. And I am too stubborn. It was not able to pull me out. Thank goodness. And I had to wonder, so if it would have been able to pull me out, what would it have done? Would it have possessed me? I don't know, but it was not able to accomplish what it was trying to do, or perhaps it was just trying to scare me. As I was trying to clear this psychic attack out, I reached out to many people in my community to ask them for advice. And a lot of people said things like, well, just visualize white light and call on your angels and that will make it go away. Or just burn sage. Have you tried burning sage? Hey, have you tried burning sage, Maya? Maya, have you tried burning sage? And I'm like, oh my God. I did that I've done that. I've done all of the stuff that's popular, and none of it has worked. Sage burning is very popular. We have this belief that it clears out everything. Well, it was not clearing out my situation. And what I came to understand later, after I cleared everything out, was that there's a difference between what I call soft techniques and then techniques that are effective for clearing out serious emergencies. And some soft techniques for psychic protection would be like calling on angels, visualizing white light, burning sage, burning a candle, saying prayers. All of those are really great for keeping your energy high vibe on a daily basis. But if you're being attacked by demons or some other kind of energies, that's too soft. That's not going to clear it out. So I had to learn some more intense, high-powered techniques that the other spiritual teachers and healers in my community they just didn't know about. So I was really pushed beyond my limits, emotionally and intellectually and spiritually, because I had to find power within myself that I didn't know that I even had. I mean, imagine that all the community that you reach out to has no advice, no good advice, and not only that, but there was a lot of shunning that started happening, where people started blocking me on Facebook. And I would go to an event, or I would go to a metaphysical shop, and people would walk the other way. They wouldn't even talk to me or have anything to do with me, because it's like, oh no, you must. The idea was that I must have been low vibe. I must have had a low vibration, or I must have done something to draw this to me. That's another fallacy in the New Age teachings, that if you have some scary or unwanted paranormal activity, that must mean that there's something wrong with you. But that's a false belief system. That's absolutely not true at all. I mean, these kinds of things can happen to anybody, whether you're low vibe, high vibe, or whatever. It doesn't matter. It happens to anybody. And in fact, what I would counter is that there are a lot of people who are really high vibe, who are here on the planet to do really important work, who are heavily targeted by paranormal activity in order to take them down, so that they'll be so busy fighting off psychic attack that they won't be able to really, step into whatever their mission might be. So obviously I was eventually able to clear out that psychic attack through some techniques that I was able to acquire. And I do talk about these techniques in my book, about exactly how I was able to clear out this situation. What I noticed, that psychic attack happened in late spring, early summer, and what I noticed for the whole rest of that summer was that I seemed to be having this download of information, like a constant download. And I realized this one day when I was having a conversation with someone, and I was just sharing all this information about psychic protection and the spiritual world, and this is how it works, this is how to protect yourself, blah, 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 blah. And I stopped and I was like, how do I know this? I didn't read it from any books, and I didn't learn it from any teachers. And I realized that as a result of the intense situation that I had been through, I don't know, I just received this huge download of information. That's the only way I can describe it. And that download, it was a huge download that first summer, and then it has continued gradually since then. So then, as I was coming to understand what I had gone through, I came to understand that, as I mentioned before, that this was a false light entity that this person was working with. As I started to speak out more about what I had gone through, I started to attract people into my life, just various people as well as clients. And they were attracted to me to work with me because they were having similar situations. And I'll share with you a little bit about these situations. I really take my client confidentiality really seriously, so I won't be sharing any exact client cases, but just some generalities. So I've had a number of people come to me who have been taught to work with spirit guides, and I have no issue with working with spirit guides. I sometimes work with them, so I'm not against spirit guides. But I've had a number of people come to me who've said that they were meditating and they were focusing on their spirit guide, and all of a sudden its face turned into something way different than how it was appearing normally. Like it turned scary for a second, like the facade slipped. Okay, I've had other people that have come to me that have said, well, I hear my spirit guide speaking very clearly to me, like I hear it like a normal person, and it's telling me all of these things, and it's telling me to do this, it's telling me to do that, and as a result, I've followed what it's telling me to do, and I've gotten into all of this horrible mess in my life. And then when I would take a look clairvoyantly at this entity that was with them, I'd be like, holy cow, this entity looks exactly like the thing that attacked me, tried to tear my soul out of my body. But I could tell, I mean, it looked like the same thing, but it was a different, wasn't the same entity, but it was the same type of entity. And what I noticed about this kind of false light phenomenon is that the being will pretend to be anything from an angel, an archangel, spirit guide, an ascended master. Ascended masters, false light entities love to pretend to be ascended masters, because now an ascended master is a spiritual being that's different than an angel. It's not in the same race as angel, but it's like a very high level ascended spiritual being. It has very esoteric knowledge, and there are actual ascended masters, ascended spiritual beings out there. But the thing is that when someone is contacted by an ascended master, it makes them feel really special, and wow, this is really amazing. Ascended master so-and-so is working with me. And so it does tend to tap into their ego and their feeling of specialness. And so they don't check to see, is it really ascended master so-and-so? Because these false light entities, that the most common facade that I see is that they pretend to be ascended masters. So I see Saint Germain. A lot of people work with Saint Germain. And I see a lot of people who don't have Saint Germain with them. They actually have a false light entity. So it's very common that when people encounter this information, they don't really want to hear it because they're very attached to believing that everything is safe, everything is good. And I think this is the reason why I actually, at first, when people heard about what I was talking about, I had a lot of people, it was like this exodus of people leaving my life. So me standing up here and talking to all of you about this, this is not for like my popularity or like anything like that. It actually has caused the opposite in my life, that there's been a huge exodus of people like just exiting my world because they really didn't want to hear about this. But I feel that it's really important. I think the message that I really want to drive home with everybody is to be really discerning. And I'm going to give you 4 tips for navigating. Now that you have this perhaps new information, that there's a lot more imposter spiritual stuff going on than you may have realized, Here are a few tips to help you navigate that moving forward. So number one is question everything. All of your beliefs that you've taken for granted for years and years and years, question those. Don't just assume that what you believe is true. So just question everything, okay? Question your beliefs, your ideas, and so on. And then number two is question everyone. Don't just automatically believe something just because someone else says it. Don't believe it because I'm saying it. So don't believe me just because. I want you to question, okay? Question. And there's a really common thing that I see happening is that really famous spiritual teachers who are world renowned and have thousands and thousands of followers, I would say even question them. I'm not saying that everybody is false, but it's important that you learn to tap into your own power and your own inner wisdom. That's the only way you're going to really be able to navigate through all of this illusion. There's so much spiritual illusion, more than ever, going on the planet right now. So the only way you can work in seeing the truth is to tap into your own inner wisdom. So don't abdicate your power to any spiritual teacher or healer, no matter how famous or how amazing they may seem. There's so much hijacking going on that even the famous teachers may have at least some hijacking occurring, and they may not realize it. Because you see, right now, most of the spiritual community doesn't understand about all this illusion that's happening. And just as a side note, one of the things that I've noticed is that so many of the, what I'll call light workers, the people who've come to the planet to do really important work, have been taken down. So many of the light workers have been taken down, but they don't know it. The reason why they've been taken down is because they've been pulled into what I call a false light matrix, where their whole spiritual team that they're working with is imposter entities. Leading them in the wrong direction. And so anyway, I've sidetracked. I'm going to come back to that false light matrix in just a minute. So number one, question everything. Number two, question everyone. Number three, it is vital that you develop your own psychic skills. Every person on the planet has psychic abilities. I introduced myself today as a psychic, just as a descriptor that yes, this is a skill set that's very strong for me. But don't think that just because I am means that you're not. Everybody is naturally intuitive, naturally psychic. It's a matter of learning to develop your skills. This is something that I teach my students, but there's a million courses out there also for developing your intuitive skill sets. One pattern that I notice is that when people have some kind of paranormal activity that's scary, or they encounter spiritual information that makes them uncomfortable or scared, they will often have the response of shutting down. They'll shut down their abilities, they'll shut down their spiritual gifts, they'll essentially put their head in the sand. And I've actually had people say to me, well, I hope that if I just don't think about it and I don't talk about it, I hope that it just goes away. I hope that if I just don't think about it and I don't talk about it, I hope that it just goes away. And meanwhile, this stuff, whatever it is totally running their life. It's running their life and maybe even ruining it. So closing your eyes doesn't help. It's like closing your eyes and then walking across a busy street and saying, I hope that if I just don't think about the cars, I won't get hit. Well, how about we open our eyes so that we can see what's going on and we can navigate So we're aware that the cars are there. It's just a thing that is. We don't have to freak out about it. We just recognize that's what it is, and we open our eyes, we open our spiritual abilities so that we can navigate and live as empowered as we can. And number 4, the last tip that I have for you, is to cultivate a peaceful life. This is easier said than done, but just remember that when you have a life of chaos and high drama, that makes you a lot more vulnerable to any kind of unwanted paranormal activity, psychic attack, not just false light stuff, but other stuff as well. So the more you can work on healing your past traumas, getting yourself more grounded in your life and living in more peace, the less vulnerable you will be and the more empowered you will be. So let me just check our time real quick. We will have a couple of minutes for questions at the end. So if you have any questions, start thinking about them right now, okay? So I'm just gonna wrap up by just telling you a little bit about what, when I was receiving that big download the summer after that psychic attack, I started to get visions of what I call the false light matrix, and I want to explain to you what it was that I was seeing and that I still see. What I would see was this big web of connections upon connections. So I would see a spiritual teacher, or, and by spiritual teacher, it could be New Age, it could be in a church, it could be, or even someone, maybe not a spiritual teacher, but some other person in a helping or assisting leadership kind of position. So I would see this person that had one or more false light entities attached to them, and then that spiritual teacher or healer would have all of their students or clients webbed off from them, and this entity would be feeding off of all of those people, and then those people would have connections, and then it would go on, and then that's just one spiritual teacher. There were teachers upon leaders that all of this false light was attached into this huge matrix, including some of the very world famous spiritual teachers. And I'm not going to go into specifics because that's not really how I roll, but I will say that one of the spiritual teachers that I clairvoyantly knew was in this web later, quite recently actually, came forward and turned themselves in for a very horrible, illegal, just horrendous sexual abuse and all sorts of other things that they were doing. And I do believe that was a result of all of the entities that were attached to that person. So the false light matrix, that is what that is referring to. So as you're thinking about any questions that you may have, I'd like to just give you a bit of info about how you can get more information once we're done with this talk. So first of all, I have a YouTube channel that is absolutely free, and it is called Psychic Protection Sanctuary. That's actually the name of my business, Psychic Protection Sanctuary. And there's hours and hours and hours of free videos on there all about psychic protection, not just about false light entities, that's what this talk is about, but all about how psychic attack works, about how the spiritual realm works. There's also videos on there that are a little bit softer and lighter for people that don't want the heavy stuff. There's personal empowerment and developing your spiritual gifts and that sort of thing. I also have a website, www.psychicprotectionsanctuary.com, and I've got cards up here, so if you're like me and you forget, you won't remember by the time you get home, you can grab one of these. Also, if you want to get on the email list, the pad of paper that's being passed around, and I'll have a pad up here as well, that you can write down your email, and I will send you the audio recording of this presentation. I'll send it to you in the next couple of days, so you'll have it right away. And then in that email, I'll also send you some free Facebook Live replays 1-hour classes on some really potent spiritual topics, as well as a quiz to find out if you're vulnerable to psychic attack. I also have a free Facebook group. So the Facebook group is really good for people who are experiencing any kind of psychic attack, whether it's false light related or not, any kind of unwanted paranormal activity. It is a free group. It's called Psychic Protection Sanctuary, and that's on my card as well. And then I also have a paid program for people that want to go really way deeper and learn the techniques that I use for clearing out entities and identifying what kind and how many entities we're dealing with and the best way to clear them out. That this is a program that is a paid program, and that's listed on my website. You can go there. Of course, there's one-on-one consultations if you're experiencing some really intense situations and you want some feedback, you want to have someone help identify what's going on, I can help you with that. And then lastly, there's my book, Darkness Disguised as Light, where I go over in depth all of the details of exactly what I went through in my crazy situation, and every chapter has a lesson at the end of it where I teach you exactly what I was learning about psychic protection as I went through it. A lot of people who've read the book have said that once they start reading it, they can't put it down. So those are not my words, that's most of the people and I see some people nodding. A lot of people read it in 2 days straight because they want to find out what's happening next. And it's a very exciting story and a totally, absolutely true story. So do we have any questions before we wrap up? Yes?
Do you have any protection wards that you can put your house in?
Oh, yes. So the question is protection wards. Do I have any protection wards? So yes, 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 and yes. And one of the things, just FYI, one of the things is that if you've ever experienced psychic attack or unwanted paranormal activity or any crazy stuff like that, it tends to make you more vulnerable to those kinds of situations again in the future. So it's really important to take proactive steps to make sure that you're even more protected than just the average person. So wards are really important. I won't have time to teach exactly what it is that I do, but I will say that I always wear protective jewelry. I have protective things set up around my property. There's also protective things in my bedroom where I sleep because you're more vulnerable during sleeping time. I also have a daily protocol that I do that's it's a meditation of steps that I go through and things that I establish in my energy field to make sure that I'm protected. So does that answer your question? Yes. Good, thank you. Any other questions? I think we have just like a minute and then we need to wrap it up. All right, well, thank you very much for being here today. I will have I'll be here for about an hour downstairs in the main room. And also feel free to reach out to me via email, or I'm on Facebook as well if you have any questions whatsoever. And Marla is over there with the email list if you feel like you'd like to get some of those freebies. All right, thank you very much, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful time at the rest of the event.